Hi, my name's Varela. 8 years ago, my parents threw me out after I uncovered a secret they'd buried my whole life. No goodbye, no explanation, just silence and a locked front door. Now, after years of pretending I didn't exist, they're back. Not to make amends, but to ask for something. They forged my signature, used my name, and rewrote the family story without me. But here's the part they didn't expect. Why would someone return to a home that never opened the door in the first place? What would you do if the people who erased you came back, needing you? Would you forgive them? Or finally tell your side of the story? I wasn't trying to find anything. That's what still stings the most. It was a Thursday afternoon, and the house smelled like lemon polish and burnt toast. My mother had asked me to help organize the files in the study. Some charity dinner invite list, I think. She was upstairs folding napkins, humming like nothing in the world had ever gone sideways. I remember the exact moment my hand hit the wrong drawer, back left corner of my father's desk, the one that always stuck a little before it gave way with a low groan. There, tucked between manila envelopes and tax documents, was a birth certificate. Mine, but not the one I'd seen in the family safe. This one looked older, creased, a little faded, but clear as day. Under Father's name, there was no Garrick Monroe, just a blank space. At first, I thought it was a copy, a mistake. Maybe it was a placeholder. My hands trembled as I scanned it again, searching for logic, for some clerical error. But it was signed. Notarized. My mother's name was there, and someone else's initials I didn't recognize. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I walked, calm as a shadow, upstairs to where my mother was fussing with wine glasses. She didn't notice me at first. "Mom," I said, voice tighter than I expected. "Can I ask you something?" She turned, smile faltering the second she saw my face. "Of course, honey." "Why does my birth certificate say Dad isn't my father?" There's a moment, just a blink, where everything in someone's face shifts, and you see the person they were before the lies. That moment passed quickly. Her expression collapsed like a tent losing air. "Where did you get that?" she asked, already knowing. "In the desk. I wasn't looking for it." She sat down. Just sat. No excuses, no denial, no anger, only fear. She looked like a woman who had been running from a shadow that had finally caught up. "I was going to tell you, one day." "One day when?" I asked, still calm. "After his funeral? After I'd built my whole life around a man who's not even—" "Don't say it," she whispered. "Don't say it like that." The front door opened downstairs. Heavy steps. My father was home. His voice floated up, some half-muttered complaint about traffic. She stood fast. "Don't ask him yet," she said. "Please, just give me a minute." But I wasn't giving anyone anything anymore. By the time he walked into the kitchen, I was standing in front of the island with the certificate on the counter. He didn't glance at it right away. "Hey, pumpkin," he said. "Smells like you burnt the—" "What is this?" I asked. His smile faded. He took one look, and his eyes hardened like concrete setting. His hand rested on the granite countertop, his wedding ring tapping slowly. "Where did you find that?" he asked, same words as my mother. Different tone. Not scared, just cold. "In your desk." He didn't sit. He didn't blink. He just stood there, chest tightening beneath that pressed shirt, and said, "You need to leave." That was it. No explanation, no argument, not even a raised voice. Just that one sentence. I waited, thinking he might follow it up with something, anything. But he didn't. I looked at my mom. She didn't move. "I have nowhere to go," I said, not as a plea, just a fact. "You should have thought of that before digging where you didn't belong." He turned and left the room. I stood there for a moment longer, then walked upstairs, pulled my duffel from under the bed, and stuffed in what I could carry. I didn't pack everything, just what I needed to survive the next day. When I came back down, my mother was standing in the foyer. She didn't speak. She didn't stop me. She didn't hug me. The air outside was cooler than it had been all week. I stepped off the porch into the dusk, hearing the soft click of the front door closing behind me. I made it as far as the corner bus stop, where I sat beneath the humming street lamp, staring at the few clothes I'd managed to cram into my bag. No one passed by. Bellevue streets are quiet after dinner. My phone buzzed. I had hoped, ridiculously, that it might be a message from my mother, or even my father. Maybe something sharp but tinged with guilt. Instead, it was just a text, from him. "We don't have a daughter like you, don't come back." I didn't cry. Not then. The tears would come later, in drips and waves, in gasps behind locked restroom doors, and silent breakdowns during subway rides. But that night, I felt nothing. Just the kind of stillness that comes before collapse. I wandered. I ended up in a 24-hour laundromat, where I curled up on a cracked plastic chair and pretended the fluorescent lights were stars. The hum of dryers became my lullaby. At some point between 2 and 3 a.m., I checked my wallet. $26 and a used bus pass. No place to stay. No one I could call. No one, except one name, still sitting in my contacts list. The only person I still believed might pick up. Ellison. I stared at that name for what felt like forever. I didn't call Ellison right away. I watched his name on my screen, blinking in and out with the rhythm of my tired thumb hovering above the dial button. The laundromat had gone quiet, save for the occasional thump of an unbalanced dryer. Somewhere outside, a delivery truck hissed to a stop, then moved on again. I finally pressed the call button. It rang twice. "Hello?" His voice sounded half asleep or half distracted. Maybe both. "It's me," I said quietly. "Varela." A long pause stretched out between us like an empty road. I heard him exhale. "What's going on?" he asked, but it didn't sound like concern. It sounded like a test. "I got kicked out," I said. "I'm at a laundromat off 42nd. I didn't know who else to call." Another pause. "You okay?" "Not really. I need somewhere to stay, just for a night or two." His tone shifted slightly, like a man balancing the weight of a secret on the tip of his tongue. "I'm out of town, visiting my cousin in Portland." That didn't track. I knew his cousin had moved to San Diego 6 months ago. I almost called him out, but something inside me said not to bother. He cleared his throat. "I mean, it's not a good time." There it was. "Right," I said. My voice didn't crack. I made sure of it. This isn't my fight, V." I nodded to myself. "Thanks anyway." Click. I sat there in the blue light of the laundromat, phone screen gone dark, face reflecting off the glass of the soda machine across from me. I wasn't sure how long I stayed, but the sun was just beginning to stain the sky, with its tired pinks, when I finally stood up and left. Seattle mornings in spring are deceptive. They look soft, mist curling off the streets, birds half-heartedly chirping. But there's still a bite in the air that finds your bones and lingers. I walked until my legs ached, stopping only to rest beneath a transit sign that promised a bus I couldn't afford. The bench was cold, but at least it didn't ask questions. I pulled my hood up, wrapped my arms around my stomach, and sat there while the city stretched awake around me. We used to talk about getting out of here, me and Ellison. We had this plan to move to Chicago, rent some tiny apartment with brick walls and bad plumbing, build something from scratch. We'd daydream over takeout containers and scratch at maps with dull pencils. Turns out, some people are only good at the dreaming part. The sky brightened enough that I figured the library would be opening soon. I headed there, not for books, but for warmth and a plug to charge my phone. When I reached the building, the security guard gave me a quick glance, but said nothing. I looked tired enough to be harmless. Inside, I settled near the back and plugged in. The hum of fluorescent lights above reminded me of the laundromat. I took a deep breath, opened the browser, and checked my email. That's when I saw it. A forwarded message, mistakenly CC'd to me by one of my father's longtime business partners. The subject line read, "Regarding Ellison Cade." I hesitated, then clicked. It wasn't long. Just a confirmation. Payment had been transferred, and Ellison had followed through. Language too formal for something so personal. The sentence that broke me was this. He understood that letting her go quietly was best for everyone involved. Quietly, like I was a scandal, a file to be sealed and archived. I sat back in my chair. The room didn't spin, but my insides felt like they were tilting. So that was it. It hadn't just been rejection. It had been a transaction, a trade. They bought him off, like I was a line item to be cleared from a spreadsheet. And he took it. I didn't cry. My tear ducts must have been bone dry by then. But something deeper than sadness settled inside me. Something steadier, heavier. I shut the screen, unplugged my phone, and walked back into the morning chill. A few blocks away, I stopped at a corner store, bought a cheap spiral notebook and a pen with the last $5 I had. No food, no water, just ink and paper. I sat outside the public library on a concrete ledge and opened the notebook to the first page. Virella Monroe. I wrote it in all caps, bold and slow. Not the name they paid to erase. Not the girl who got thrown out like a mistake. Not someone's secret or shadow. If I ever came back from this, if I ever had the chance to build a life with my own hands, they'd regret believing I could be erased so easily. I tucked the notebook into my jacket and stood up. It wasn't heavy, but what I wrote in it pressed against my chest like a shield. I didn't know where I was going yet, but I knew I couldn't stay planted on a stone ledge pretending ink could replace shelter. A city bus rattled by, its lights flickering in the mist. I walked. 3 days later, I got hired at a cafe off 6th and Main. The manager barely looked up from her clipboard when she said, "Aprons in the back, don't be late and don't touch your phone on the floor." I wasn't picky. I needed cash and something to do besides replay every conversation I'd never get to finish. The shifts were early, before the sunrise could crawl up the skyline. I learned how to pour burnt coffee with a smile and sweep tile without making noise. I was invisible in all the right ways. Customers rarely looked at my face. They looked through me like I was part of the decor. It was during a slow mid-morning lull, after I'd wiped down the same table 3 times, that someone left a newspaper behind, folded neatly like it still had purpose. I picked it up mostly out of boredom. Her face was there. Naira. My sister. Front page, lower half. She was being honored by some civic council for youth mentorship or some carefully curated community initiative. She wore our family's smile, the one we practiced for holiday cards and church fundraisers. The headline called her a pillar of modern grace. The article went on about the Monroe family's deep commitment to integrity and values, and how Nasera exemplified everything a young woman should strive to be. No mention of me. Not even a survived by one sister, or a vague nod to the idea that I might still exist. I folded the paper in half, slowly, carefully, like I didn't want to disturb the lie too much. Then I tucked it under the counter and continued serving customers who didn't know or care who I was before this name tag. Later that same day, the door swung open at 5:32 p.m. I remember, because I had just checked the clock, wondering how much longer I had to fake energy. Nara walked in with her fiancé. I recognized him from old photos and a handful of family parties I hadn't been invited to. She looked exactly the same, hair blown out, lips lined, posture confident. She stopped for a second when she saw me behind the counter, but only for a second. Then she kept walking like we were strangers. They ordered lattes and a pastry. I made them without comment. When I set the tray on their table, she finally looked up. Her fiancé had his phone out, distracted. She leaned forward just slightly and said, "Didn't think the family pet could beg for scraps this well." No smile, no humor, just that. I stared at her for a beat. I didn't blink. Then I turned and walked back behind the counter. I didn't react the way she probably expected me to. I didn't run out or break down. I didn't hurl a cup or slam a door. I simply did my job, but something in me shifted. Later that night, I walked the 6 blocks back to the tiny room I shared with a girl named Lacey, who worked nights at the airport and slept during the day. We didn't talk much, but she never asked questions. That was all I needed. I dropped my bag, pulled off my shoes, and sat on the floor beside the nightstand. I dug out the shoebox I'd been keeping under the bed, a quiet place where I stored scraps of memory. Receipts, bus passes, photos, printouts. I tore out the page from the newspaper and folded it 4 times before placing it at the bottom of the box. I didn't keep it to remember her. I kept it to remind myself who I wasn't anymore. There's a difference between being erased and choosing to disappear. That day, I chose to stop asking for a space at a table I was never meant to sit at. I used to think family was something automatic, unchangeable, unconditional. But I was wrong. Family can be edited, cropped, rewritten, and when you realize you're just background in someone else's version of the story, the only thing left to do is write your own. By the end of that week, I stopped checking the mailbox. Every envelope that landed there just reminded me of what I didn't have: a home, a family, a plan. So when I stumbled across the Craigslist post, it wasn't ambition that made me click. It was survival. Live-in assistant needed. Must be discreet, dependable. Legal background a plus. Elderly client. Start immediately. No photo, no fluff. Just instructions and an address in Tacoma. It sounded like it could have been a scam, but something in the wording, clean, no nonsense, felt different. It sounded like someone who didn't have time for drama. I could relate. I emailed my resume, if you could even call it that, and by the next morning, there was a reply waiting. Come by Monday. Noon. Don't be late. R. Elbridge, I took the early bus out of Seattle, the kind of ride where no one talks, and everyone pretends the windows are more interesting than people. I stared out at the suburbs shifting into older neighborhoods, less polished, less pressure. It was the first time in weeks I felt like I could breathe. The house sat on a corner lot with ivy crawling up one side, like it had been trying to swallow the building for years. The lawn was clipped but plain. One ceramic rabbit stood guard by the porch, chipped ear, one eye missing. I knocked twice. The door swung open with the sharpness of someone who didn't believe in easing into anything. A tall woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun looked me up and down. "You're late," she said. I glanced at my phone. It was 12:03. Bus stop was farther than I thought, I offered. She stepped aside without replying. The inside was warm but unwelcoming. No knickknacks, no family photos, just shelves of books, stacks of neatly labeled folders, and a faint smell of lemon oil and dust. She walked ahead without looking back. "You'll do light housekeeping, answer the phone, sort files. You don't speak unless spoken to, and you'll sleep in the spare room upstairs. That's the end of it." "Got it," I said. She finally turned, narrowed her eyes. "You look like someone who's been erased." I blinked. She didn't wait for a reaction. "Well, that's usually when people start to matter, when someone else tries to write them out." Her name was Ramona Elbridge, retired judge, no children, no spouse, no patients, and she was the first person in months who didn't treat me like I was fragile or unwanted. The first few days were quiet. I folded towels, sorted papers, answered 2 phone calls. I didn't ask questions, and she didn't offer small talk, but she paid me in cash every Friday and never once mentioned who I used to be. On the 3rd night, while setting the table with silent precision, she looked up and said, "You're not dumb. What do you want to do besides fold towels?" I hesitated, unsure if it was a trap. "I used to want to go to law school," I admitted. She raised an eyebrow. "Used to, or still do, but you're scared to admit it?" I shrugged. "Both." She nodded once. "Good. Then I'll test if you're sharp enough not to waste my time." That was all she said, but it was the first seed of something I hadn't felt in a long time: possibility. Later that week, while cleaning out an old filing cabinet in her study, I found a small tin box shoved toward the back. Most of what she kept was labeled and cataloged. This wasn't. The lid creaked when I opened it. Inside were receipts, handwritten notes, clippings, and one envelope, aged at the corners, sealed, with my name written across it in cursive. Varela Monroe, not to whom it may concern. Not resident. My name, in my grandmother's handwriting. I would recognize that slanted M anywhere. I stood there holding the envelope like it might explode. For a long time, I didn't open it. When I finally did, I sat down on the floor to read. The letter was formal, typed, but the message was clear. She had left something for me. There had been a trust. A portion of her estate held in my name, separate from the rest. She'd made sure of it through a law firm in Bellevue. The last line of the letter read, "They may erase your name from their mouths, but they can't erase it from paper. This is yours." I held that letter like it was air after drowning. It wasn't about the money, though God knows I could have used it. It was about being seen. Someone had remembered me in a way that counted. Someone had thought I was worth something, even when my parents decided I wasn't. I made a copy of the letter the next day, tucked the original into a plastic sleeve, and placed it inside Ramona's fireproof safe, next to her own will and emergency documents. And then I walked to the local library, sat at a desk by the window, and checked out every book I could find on estate law. If they wanted to pretend I never existed, fine. But legally, I was still right there, on the record. 3 weeks passed. I kept reading case law until my eyes burned, annotating every page with a pencil so dull I had to sharpen it with a kitchen knife. The trust was legitimate. The language airtight. My grandmother had made sure of it. There wasn't a clause, a comma, a contingency that gave them a way out. If they'd tried to revoke it, they'd done it illegally, or worse, under the assumption I'd never fight back. I didn't reach out. I didn't post. I didn't stir the waters. Then one morning, a courier rang my apartment buzzer. The envelope was thick, legal quality. I didn't need to see the letterhead to know who sent it. I opened it standing at my sink, hands still wet from rinsing dishes. Inside was a request. No, a plea, dressed in polite language. An invitation to a private family dinner, an opportunity to reconnect and discuss mutual interests. Attached to it, behind 3 pages of nonsense, was a document, one that requested my signature to relinquish any and all claims tied to the Monroe estate. I laughed. Out loud, no apology, no phone call, no acknowledgement of what had been done. Just a signature line and an envelope that smelled like desperation masked in formality. They didn't want reconciliation. They wanted a fix. I let the letter sit on my table for a full day. Then, I circled a date and time on a sticky note, folded it, and mailed it back to their attorney with 5 words. Dinner accepted. I'll bring dessert. That Friday, I pulled up to the Monroe estate at 6:45 p.m., wearing black slacks, a blazer that didn't quite fit, and confidence that did. I didn't knock. I rang the bell like I'd never been banished. Celestine opened the door. Her smile was stretched too tight. "You look..." "Well," she said, stepping aside. "I am." The house hadn't changed. Not a lamp out of place. Not a rug moved. It was like they'd frozen time after I left, hoping it'd all reset if they just pretended hard enough. Garrick stood in the formal dining room, glass of scotch in one hand, his other in his pocket. He didn't say, "Welcome back." He said, "Thanks for coming. Let's keep this civil." That told me everything. Dinner was served by a housekeeper I didn't recognize. Nobody touched the food. The small talk was pitiful. Celestine asked about the weather in Tacoma, as if it was a foreign country. Garrick sipped his drink like it was the only thing anchoring him in place. Finally, he reached into a leather folder and slid a set of documents across the table toward me. "This would clean things up," he said, not looking at me. "Make things less complicated." I didn't touch the papers. I reached into my bag and placed a copy of the letter I'd received from the law firm, the one confirming my legal stake. Then I opened a second folder and laid out my grandmother's notarized trust declaration. "It's not complicated," I said. "I was never removed. You just counted on me disappearing. Celestine inhaled sharply. Garrick stared at the papers like they'd betrayed him personally. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. Garrick said nothing. He folded his arms. We're trying to handle this privately, Varela. No need to escalate. I looked at him evenly. Privately? You mean quietly? You mean off the books? He leaned forward. You're still part of this family. No, I'm still part of the estate. There's a difference. Celestine looked down. I think for the first time, she understood I wasn't the girl they kicked out 8 years ago. I was someone they had to sit across from now. Someone they couldn't rewrite. I stood up, sliding the documents back into my bag. You can keep the meal, I said, but I won't be signing anything. Not tonight. Not ever. As I walked toward the foyer, I paused in front of a framed photo on the wall. A family tree designed for some charity gala years ago. My sister's name in gold script. Garrick and Celestine at the top like royalty. My name was missing. I remembered standing at that same gala, pretending not to notice, pretending I didn't care. But I did. Ink fades, but court filings don't. I turned back to them, one hand on the door. You erased me once, but I'm still here, on record, in law. And now, unfortunately for you, in memory. Then I left. Not angry, just done. I didn't slam the door when I got home that night. I didn't throw my keys or sink to the floor in some cinematic collapse. Instead, I washed my hands, set the folder down on the kitchen table, lit a candle. Then I sat in silence and watched the flame flicker. By morning, the news had found me. A friend from law class forwarded the article. It was plastered across the local business column and reshared in every online neighborhood forum. Reunited, the Monroe family restores harmony with estranged daughter. There was a photo, not of the dinner at my apartment, not of me, just Garrick and Celestine standing on the front steps of their home, flanked by Naira and her fiancé, arms linked like they were preparing for a magazine spread. My name was in the headline, but not my face, not even a quote. I scrolled down to the caption, a quiet reconciliation followed by a joint family statement and legal realignment of estate planning. They turned our confrontation into a PR stunt, spun my silence into compliance, turned my dignity into decor. I stared at the screen and then walked over to the window. Rain speckled the glass in thin, uneven trails. I pressed my forehead against the cool surface and closed my eyes. They still thought this was about property. They still believed I cared about their good name more than my own peace. And worst of all, they still underestimated me. I picked up my phone, typed a short text. Dinner, my place. Friday, 7 p.m. Bring only yourselves. No lawyer, no publicist, no cameras. They replied 2 hours later. See you then. Friday came. I cleaned my apartment top to bottom, not because I needed it spotless, but because I wanted them to see exactly how I lived. Small, intentional, mine. I cooked. Nothing fancy. Roasted vegetables, a lemon chicken. I even set out cloth napkins. I wasn't trying to impress them. I was trying to remove excuses. At 7:03 p.m., the doorbell rang. I opened it to find both of them standing there, side by side like awkward statues. Garrick held a bottle of wine. Celestine a store-bought cake with a label that read Caramel Celebration. I didn't invite them in with a smile. I just stepped aside. They took their seats at the table. I poured water, then sat across from them. Between us sat a manila folder, unopened. We ate mostly in silence. Celestine made small talk about how the city's changed and your neighborhood's very humble. Garrick nodded a few times, but didn't contribute. Halfway through the meal, he set down his fork and cleared his throat. We'd like to put the past behind us, he said. We know we made mistakes, but you're still our daughter, and this tension doesn't serve anyone. I looked at him calmly. Is that your way of saying sorry? Celestine jumped in, voice soft. We don't expect everything to be perfect again, but we hoped we could rebuild something. I reached for the folder, opened it slowly, and pulled out 2 pieces of paper. The first was a scanned copy of the relinquishment form they gave me 8 years ago, the one they begged me to sign when I was 19. The one they said would simplify matters, would protect everyone. I never signed it. They thought I lost it. I laid it down. The second document was newer, one I obtained through quiet research and a helpful paralegal. It was a deed transfer. Property moved under a joint trust, bearing my forged signature. I placed it beside the first. "You remember this, don't you?" I said, tapping the old form. "You told me it would make things easier, that it was the cleanest way forward." Garrick stiffened. Celestine paled. Then I pointed to the newer file. "But this one? This isn't clean. This is illegal." They both stared, wordless. I folded my hands. "I'm not here to ruin you. I'm not going to sue, yet. But I needed you to know something. You never had power over me, only over my silence." Garrick started to protest, mumbling something about miscommunication, paperwork oversight. I shook my head. "Don't insult either of us with that." Celestine's lip trembled. "We thought, after dinner at the house, we thought things were improving." "You thought I was softening." She looked away. I stood and slowly gathered the documents. "There will be no settlement, no signature, no joint statement." I walked them to the door. Neither resisted. Just before stepping out, Celestine turned to me. Her voice was almost a whisper. "You're stronger than I ever knew." I didn't answer. Not because I didn't believe her, but because I didn't need her to believe me anymore. Some truths don't need volume, just presence. After they left, I blew out the candles and stacked the dishes in the sink. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt whole. I didn't check the news that weekend. I stayed off social media, didn't answer messages, avoided small talk at the coffee shop where I sometimes graded case briefs. I thought that dinner had ended things, or at least moved the storm offshore. But by Tuesday morning, it hit landfall again. It started with a coworker tapping my shoulder and asking, "Hey, didn't you say your parents were the Monroes? This is wild." She held out her phone, screen already scrolling through a local news article. "Monroe family restores harmony with estranged daughter," the headline read. Below it, a photo taken outside some charity gala. Garrick stood in his signature navy suit, hand on Celestine's back. Nara stood beside them, flashing her pageant-trained smile. I wasn't in the picture, but I was in the story. The article spoke of private efforts to heal a broken bond, of progress between parties, and, most insultingly, of recent legal cooperation from all family members. Legal cooperation. They used my name in a staged reconciliation without my presence or consent, dragging me into a narrative they crafted for public consumption. I hadn't spoken to them since the night I told them there'd be no signature, no statement, no deal. But the article made it seem like we'd toasted over champagne and walked hand in hand into the future. And that wasn't even the worst part. That came an hour later when I got a call from Kara, my former classmate and now part-time assistant at a downtown law firm. "You need to see this," she said, emailing me an attachment immediately after we hung up. It was a loan document, recently filed, property-related, listed under the Monroe Family Trust, and my name was on it. My forged signature sat there in ink I never touched. The same handwriting I remembered from old report cards, fake birthday cards my father had signed for my mother when he forgot. The same lazy loops in the M, the sharp, impatient tail of the E. They hadn't just lied to the public. They'd tried to financially bind me to their decisions, again. That was the final straw. I didn't call them, I called a lawyer. And I called a journalist I trusted, someone who'd once written a brutal takedown of a corporate heiress who tried to bury her scandal behind a charity gala. She didn't ask for drama. She asked for documents. And I had them. By the end of the day, my own statement was live on a quiet but respected legal accountability blog. Being erased publicly is one thing. Being manipulated privately is another. I never signed anything. I never consented. And if this continues, I won't remain silent anymore. V. Monroe. By Wednesday, the Monroe family's inboxes were flooded. Their attorney reached out to mine. The media outlet took down the original article, but the screenshot had already spread. They tried to call me. I didn't answer. They sent an email asking to meet. I didn't reply. On Friday morning, I received a notice from the local court. Celestine and Garrick had requested mediation. I was required to show. I arrived early that morning, parked 2 blocks away, and walked in through the back entrance. Reporters were already outside the courthouse, calling out names, hoping for a quote. I passed them without a glance, wearing sunglasses and the same neutral-colored coat I always wore to funerals and job interviews. They didn't deserve rage, not anymore. They deserved paperwork and silence. As I waited in the lobby, I thought back to the first time I realized their image mattered more than their integrity. I was 17, wearing a borrowed dress, watching my parents speak at a fundraiser. They never said my name once. They mentioned our daughters, but not Virella. I didn't understand it then. I do now. They wanted the illusion of family more than the reality of it. The mediator's assistant came out to call us in. We entered the room. Long table, legal pads, pitcher of water no one would touch. Garrick and Celestine were already seated, trying to look composed. The mediator began. Before we proceed, are all parties open to finding common ground? I looked across the table at them. If they can say my name, I said, then maybe. The silence in the room stretched long enough for the mediator to shift awkwardly in his chair. Garrick stared at the table, and Celestine reached for her glass of water, but didn't drink. I waited. I wasn't in a rush. I'd spent years waiting for them to call me by name. A few more seconds didn't matter. Finally, Garrick cleared his throat. His voice wasn't steady, but it wasn't shaking either. You are Virella Monroe, my daughter. Celestine didn't speak, but her head dipped slightly, like she was surrendering without saying a word. That was probably all she could manage. The mediator blinked, confused. So, just to confirm, Ms. Monroe, are you accepting their settlement? I looked him in the eye and said, no. Let the record reflect. I didn't come for anything material. I came for that. He nodded slowly, trying to adjust the tone in his voice to match the shift in the room. Very well. The request for asset reconciliation will remain unsigned. Shall we proceed with closing notes? I stood. There's no need. I've said what I needed. They didn't stop me as I walked out. Not this time. I stepped into the hallway just as a courthouse janitor wheeled his cart around the corner. He smiled politely. I nodded back. Outside, the sky was heavy with that flat gray that belongs only to Pacific Northwest winters. Rain hung in the air, but hadn't committed yet. I didn't feel victorious, but I did feel complete. It was strange, walking away without a settlement, without money, without any tangible win, but knowing deep down that something had shifted. They finally said it. Not for a headline, not for charity optics, just because I asked them to. For years, I'd fantasized about the big moment. Some courtroom speech, a headline reversal, a public humiliation. I'd rehearsed those monologues in my head during bus rides, shower thoughts, while folding laundry in Ramona's house. And yet, when I was face to face with them, what I wanted most was the one thing they'd never offered. Acknowledgement. Not validation. Just truth. And I got it. I passed through the courthouse lobby without speaking. There were no reporters today, no cameras, no whispers. Just the soft buzz of fluorescent lights and the low hum of a vending machine near the elevators. By the time I made it home, the adrenaline had worn off. I changed into sweats, made tea, and opened the mediation summary that had been emailed to me within the hour. I read through it once, then printed a hard copy. I didn't file it with my legal papers. I didn't frame it. I folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer I rarely opened. Then I reached into the top shelf of my closet and pulled down an old journal. There, Between 2 pages, worn soft by time and hesitation, was a letter I'd written to myself on the day I left Bellevue. The handwriting was jagged, full of pain and fire. Words like worthless and replaceable bled through the paper like old wounds refusing to heal. I held it for a moment, rereading the version of me who thought she needed their permission to exist. Then I walked to the sink and lit a match. It burned slow, curling inward. The words turned to smoke, then to nothing. I watched it go, not out of anger, but release. I didn't need to be the daughter they'd thrown out. I didn't even need to be the one they tried to reclaim. I just needed to keep becoming the person I was always capable of being, without apology, without permission. That night, I turned my phone face down and slept through until morning. And for the first time in years, I didn't check for missed messages from people who once claimed to love me. A few days later, I opened my mailbox and saw a small white envelope with my name written in handwriting I hadn't seen in years. The loops were tight, the ink slightly faded. No return address, but I didn't need one. I knew it was hers. I sat down at the kitchen counter, peeled the flap open carefully, and unfolded the single sheet inside. There was no heading, no date, just a paragraph in blue pen. Your father's been in and out of the hospital. Nothing urgent, just age catching up. He doesn't say it, but he asks about you. You still have his eyes. I thought you should know. That was it. No, we're sorry. No, I love you. Just a sentence about genetics and a passive mention of my name. And yet, it didn't hurt. Not the way it once might have. I folded the letter back up and placed it in the drawer with the mediation summary, right next to the burned-out corner of my old life. The next morning, I pulled down the memory box from the attic. It had collected a thin layer of dust. Inside were fragments I hadn't touched in years. Postcards, ticket stubs, half-written notes. At the very bottom, still taped where I'd placed it long ago, was the photo they had once ripped in half. Me and my grandmother on the front porch, both smiling, both unaware of what the next decade would take. I'd taped the pieces back together the week after I was kicked out. Not to fix what had been done, but to remind myself what I still had. Now I took the photo to a small shop down the block and had it framed in simple dark wood. No plaque, no caption. I hung it near my bedroom door, not for forgiveness, but for truth. Some memories aren't meant to be polished. They're just meant to be seen. That week, I returned to work at the rehab center. The halls were quiet, the lighting always too soft, like the building itself was trying not to startle the patients. I spent my afternoons helping a girl named Maya learn to walk again. She had survived a stroke at 12 and was relearning everything: balance, coordination, even how to stand without collapsing. Her fingers gripped my hand tightly as she moved from bar to bar. "You think I'll ever walk normal again?" she asked one day, sweat dripping down her temples. "You already are," I told her. "It just doesn't feel normal yet because it's new." She stared at me like she didn't quite believe it, but maybe wanted to. They, my family, had once filled every corner of my mind. Their approval, their silence, their absence. But that space now belonged to people like Maya, people who needed presence, not perfection. One afternoon in early spring, I stopped by the hospital downtown to visit an old friend recovering from a minor surgery. As I signed in at the front desk, I caught a glimpse of someone entering behind me. I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Michael. He had the same stiff walk, the same slight hunch from sitting too long at a desk. We hadn't spoken in years, not since the morning I walked away and he watched from the driveway, arms crossed. He saw me, I saw him. We didn't speak, but he nodded once, and I returned the gesture. That was enough. Forgiveness doesn't always mean returning to what was. Sometimes it just means not dragging the past into every room you walk into. I took the elevator up to the 3rd floor and delivered the book and flowers I'd brought. When I left, I passed the lobby again, and Michael was gone. I stepped outside into the wind and sun, feeling both at once. My phone buzzed with a reminder for a staff meeting, but I ignored it for a moment longer. I didn't win because they apologized. I won because I no longer needed them to. Sometimes healing doesn't look like hugs or apologies. Sometimes it looks like walking away without slamming the door. It looks like choosing peace over vindication, not because they deserved peace, but because you did. If there's anything I've learned, it's this. You don't need everyone to believe in your worth for it to be real. You don't need permission to rewrite your own story, and you certainly don't need to carry someone else's shame just because they handed it to you. I didn't win because they changed. I won because I did. So maybe this story made you think of someone, a parent, a sibling, a partner, someone who never said your name the right way. Maybe it reminded you of a silence you've been living in too long. And maybe, just maybe, it's time you reclaimed your own voice. Now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to walk away from someone just to protect your peace? Was there ever a time you let go, not because you didn't care, but because you finally cared enough about yourself? Drop a comment below. Let me know where you're watching from, whether you're in Michigan, Texas, New York, or somewhere else entirely. If this story touched your heart, comment 1, or tell me what part resonated with you most. And if it didn't connect with you, that's okay too. Tell me why. I'm here to listen. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, real, raw, and deeply human, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Every voice deserves to be heard. And maybe next time, we'll tell yours. Thanks for watching. And more importantly, thank you for staying.